Our sermon text comes from Psalm 23, which we just sang. We can turn to that now as we read it in preparation. Psalm 23. If you have a Pew Bible, it's on page 441. Psalm 23, and I'll begin reading at verse 1. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Congregation, today is a joyous occasion. It's Sunday, and that's an occasion for joy. But we also are here, and today we will celebrate after the sermon the profession of faith of our new sister Francine. And for today, I asked Francine which text she would want preached today. And when given the option, Francine chose the final verses of Romans 8. And then I had to say, well, no, we did that last year at the baptism of Michael and Victoria, so unfortunately I can't say yes. I could have, I suppose, but it would have been boring for some of us. So instead, Francine chose Psalm 23, which is very intimidating, given the stature of Psalm 23 in the Christian faith. So bear with me, Psalm 23 is a pretty special psalm, I think, for most of us. It's not just a bunch of words on a page for most Christians. It's not a statement of ideas, really. I think Psalm 23 to Francine and the rest of us is something we live. It's something that resides in our bones. It's something that kind of is down in the deepest caverns of our hearts. It's something that pops out in those dark moments of life, and also sometimes in the celebrations of life. This psalm is like blood moving through our bodies. And so bear with me today as we walk through this psalm, and I pray that this psalm may comfort you even more after this sermon as we see under this theme, blessed are those whom the shepherd leads. And we'll see number 1, the shepherd, and number 2, the shepherd's care, and number 3, the shepherd's hope. And of course, as you know, Psalm 23 begins with the immortal words, the words that are famous across the world. Right? The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. Or maybe we're more familiar with the King James. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, which I sort of prefer. And I think we read these words and we understand instinctively what they mean for us. We need a shepherd for our soul. But I think there's a little bit more to it, and I wonder if we fully grasp the import of such words. Because if these words are true, then 2 significant things have to follow. Number 1, if the Lord is my shepherd, then I am his sheep. Which seems obvious. But imagine we translated the first sentence of the psalm, as I am God's sheep, I shall not want. Doesn't have quite the same ring, does it? But I think we need to just dwell here for a second. I mean, I don't know about you. Recently, Lisa and I watched this show on Amazon Prime. It's called Clarkson's Farm. This is where a TV presenter from the BBC is actually a car journalist. He runs a farm for a year. He purchases 76 sheep to work on his farm, and he films himself as a new farmer with new sheep. And it's the sheep, it becomes clear, are astonishingly inept. They are the definition of unwise. They consistently do the wrong thing, and they are constantly a problem for him. The only thing the sheep do well is eat, which creates even more problems. Everything they do requires the care of the farmer. And they are expensive to own, and he ends up making no money on them. They're also defenseless against any attackers or danger. They require constant protection. And so, to say, I am God's sheep, is to say, I am a fluffy, white, woolly, four-legged ball of foolishness. And I don't think we particularly like being described that way, do we? But I think we have to start there with this psalm. But I don't want to, there's more to it actually with sheep. I know it's a favorite sport of preachers is to call everyone sheep and then insult everyone. But there's more to it. You see, if well cared for, sheep can be very useful. Sheep provide food or milk often for farmers. We don't drink sheep's milk, but many people do. Sheep also can provide wool for clothing. Sheep also provide fertilizer for fields. And if cared well for, sheep can do a lot for humans. But here's the key, and this is where the psalm begins. Sheep can only be useful or beneficial or flourish if they are well cared for. The well-being of sheep entirely depends on who cares for them. That is one of the most unique things about sheep. Hence the theme, blessed are those whom the shepherd leads. And we could say, unfortunate and harassed are those who have no shepherd, which is exactly what Jesus says in Matthew 9, verse 36, when he sees a crowd of people, and Jesus says, he had compassion on them because they are harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Sheep need a shepherd, and so do you. Without a shepherd, you can't flourish. In fact, you may even perish. Without a shepherd, you are defenseless. And so this then begs the question, what is a shepherd, and how is a shepherd good for me? What do shepherds do anyway? We don't have shepherds in Brampton, at least not that I'm aware of. We're not used to thinking about shepherding. And so I had to do some research so that we can understand what a shepherd is. What did a Palestinian Israelite shepherd do? And curiously, as an odd fact for you, I found an issue of Scientific American from 1910 that had a description of somebody who spent a lot of time with shepherds in Palestine in 1910. And the reason this is important is because at that time, the people lived the same way they lived for thousands of years, which is not true today. And he lives with the shepherds, and the way he describes the shepherds sounds exactly like how David and other shepherds lived in Israel. And I got some quotes from the article. You'll begin to see where I'm going. He says, look, these shepherds, they live entirely with their flocks. Night and day, their sheep and goats are their sole friends and companions. So these shepherds live day and night with the flocks. And now listen to this. The shepherds of the Holy Land are men of some initiative and intelligence. Not what you would immediately think, but nonetheless. Their business is at once an honorable one, yet full of difficulty and danger. For this latter reason, many of them carry heavy wooden clubs and even swings. This is the rod that we're going to see later. The rod is a club. And with these weapons, the shepherd protects his flock from wild beasts, hyenas, leopards, panthers, and wolves. But, listen to this, his worst enemy is not the wild animals of the country, but the roving Bedouins, who are always making raids and carrying off sheep, with the result that even today many a good shepherd is called to lay down his life for the sheep. You see? People are constantly trying to steal sheep, and to defend your sheep, you have to fight. And you may even die. So shepherding is a dangerous occupation. Now listen, here's another thing. It would be impossible to drive the flocks from place to place unless dogs were employed. There are no sheepdogs in eastern countries. Hence, the shepherd goes on in front, the sheep following behind. One of the shepherd's principal duties is to lead the sheep from pasture to pasture. Now listen, the stony hillsides of Judea, the finding of fresh pasturage is no easy task. Tufts of rough, stringy grass struggle through the poor limestone. The fodder is scanty. It's only in Galilee that there's abundant pasturage. So the flocks are constantly moving, because there's never enough food for them to stay in one place for long. And this puts them at constant danger. And now, one last quote from a different person. He said, "I do not remember ever to have seen in the East a flock of sheep without a shepherd." Think about it. He says, I have never seen a flock of sheep in the East, which is in Israel, without a shepherd. Never. On some high hill, across which at night the hyenas howl, when you meet him, the shepherd, sleepless, far-sighted, weather-beaten, armed, leaning on his staff, looking out over his scattered sheep, every one of them on his heart, you understand why the shepherd of Judea sprang to the front in his people's history, why he gave his name to their king, why Christ took him on as the type. You see, this fills in a lot of gaps in Psalm 23. And the key point I want to make in this first point is this. It's clear that sheep cannot live without a shepherd, and it's also clear that in Judea and in Palestine, it is extremely dangerous to be a sheep. And for the amount of effort and intelligence and skill and bravery that it takes to nurture sheep in Palestine is enormous. The sheep don't just need a shepherd, they need a certain kind of shepherd, and the bravery of that shepherd is directly correlated to their flourishing. The shepherd also nurtures the sheep, so he's nurturing and brave. And only when the shepherd does all these things do the sheep give their milk and their wool and their love. And the big idea of Psalm 23 is that human beings are exactly like this. That they need a shepherd just like that because their situation is just as unsafe as that of sheep. And the great idea is that with the right shepherd, you and I will have everything that we need. But with the wrong shepherd, we will have lack. And Psalm 23 fills this out. And this is our second point. Because Psalm 23 is this poetic description of the benefits that the sheep receive from the right shepherd. Right? Verse 2. The shepherd makes me lie down in green pastures. Incidentally, sheep don't like lying down unless they feel safe. And they don't lie down if they're hungry or stressed, I learned on the internet. Also, sheep will not drink water that's running fast or foaming. Sheep need cool pools of water in order to eat and to feel rested and to drink. And so a wise shepherd will lead his flock to a place where there's abundant grass, where the sheep can lie down as they are full, and where there's quiet, calm pools of water. And the point is, Jesus is the same. Jesus is the kind of shepherd that wants to lead you and me to places where we can eat to our fullness and sit by cool, calm pools of water. And of course, most of you will counter that and you'll say, why is my life so full of grief, stress, and pain? How come Jesus isn't leading me to a more peaceful place? Well, one of the things Psalm 23 is trying to teach you is that Jesus is the peace in your life. For Jesus to love you Jesus' love for you isn't just bringing you to a cottage. Jesus' love for you is to be in your life as the green pasture and the quiet waters for you. The worship of Jesus on Sunday, our times of prayer, these things are the green pastures of our hearts. The Lord's Supper, right? We eat and drink Jesus. And in doing so, we find true rest. What's fascinating is that in this psalm, it's teaching us that our true rest isn't found by going on vacation or watching TV. The true rest, the kind of soul rest that you and I need, is found as you feed on Jesus Christ, and as you know him and as you spend time with him alone. Because only he can relieve your mind and your heart from the emotional trauma of this life. That's why, for example, it's one of the reasons we Sabbath on Sunday. And on our Sabbath on Sunday, we worship. Why? It seems like it's a lot of work to go to worship. But no, Jesus is the peace that your heart needs. Rest is not just resting from labor, but resting from the world and its constant burden on us. And this is where we get verse 3. He refreshes my soul. He refreshes my soul. The Lord and then Jesus refreshes my soul. Wow. Incidentally, this is one of the reasons we don't play loud music in our church. We don't come to church to be burdened with noise. We come to church to be refreshed in our souls. And part of worship is stilling your soul in the heart, in the presence of a shepherd. He's leading you to a quiet place, to a place where you can feed and feel that rest. Many of us know that the true refreshment of life really only comes after a worship service or after a time of intense meditation on Scripture or prayer. This is when there's this deep rest that we almost can't achieve any other way. And Jesus is saying, if you have me as your shepherd, and if you see me as your shepherd, I can give you that kind of refreshment. I can do that. I will do that. That's what I'm trying to do for you. That's why, come to me, all you who are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. I will give you rest in your soul from the trauma, the emotional trauma of this world. And Jesus is saying, you will not find that rest unless you have me as your shepherd. You will be harassed and helpless if I'm not your shepherd. And then he says, he guides me along right paths for his name's sake. The shepherd guides his sheep on the sure paths, and he uses his staff to restrain the sheep that stray from the path. Curious fact of sheep, as I learned this week. When a sheep wants to leave the flock, or even when a sheep is the last sheep in a flock, that usually means it's sick. It's fascinating how prone we are to being sick sheep. We want to wander from the flock and take our own paths in life, through the hills and the thickets. And sheep are foolish. A few years ago in Turkey, a rogue sheep led 400 sheep over a cliff. That's what sheep do when they take their own path and they don't listen to the shepherd. You and I are so prone to becoming sick, thinking we don't need the herd, we don't need the other sheep, and we don't need the shepherd. We can find our own way. But Jesus, you see, one of the things that the good shepherd does is he doesn't let you walk your own path. You see? The good shepherd, he's got the staff with the hook on the end, and he uses that to pull you back onto the path. He doesn't let you get too far. That's one of his greatest blessings to you. Many of us are frustrated right now that some path wasn't open to us in our lives. But this psalm, David is saying in the psalm, he's saying, listen, he's leading you on the path of righteousness. This is what he wants for you. That's where he's placing you, and it's good for you. I can think of my own life of times when I tried to wander and the staff of Christ hit me hard. The staff can be many things. It can be your church. It can be your family. It can just be some moment of awareness. And Francine will say the same. She can talk of many things that Christ had to do to break her down so that she didn't choose her own harmful path. And this is interesting that the Good Shepherd, you see, the Good Shepherd does not lead us to places where there's no danger either. It doesn't mean, following the shepherd doesn't mean that we will never face danger. The path of righteousness is actually quite dangerous. There are wild animals, sheep stealers, false shepherds, all these things. But in verse 4 we have this fascinating, even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. And I prefer the King James. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. And the point being that the path of righteousness, the path to the green pastures, is a path in which there will be danger. It's fascinating that in Palestine, many of the roads and paths, according to the internet, walk through dark ravines. And these ravines are gloomy, and they're perfect places for ambushes. An animal or a Bedouin band that will be the place where they try to take the sheep because they're confined. And so the sheep know this, I would imagine, and they don't want to go into the ravine. The shepherd says, no, we are going to go through because on the other side is your next pasture. In order to eat, we have to cross the ravine. And if you follow me, I will keep you safe in the ravine. I will keep you safe in the valley of the shadow of death. And with the shepherd, the sheep can follow in safety. They're not safe because they're safe. They're not safe because there's no danger. They're safe because of who is with them. That's why he says, though I walk through the valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. It's like children. They'll do almost anything if only their parents go with them. I think we're a bit puzzled here a little. This is where the rod comes into play, right? How can a shepherd provide that level of safety for sheep? And then it says, your rod and staff, they comfort me. And get this. He's comforted by the rod and the staff of the shepherd. So, let's say it crudely. The sheep are comforted because the shepherd carries a big stick. Normally, we wouldn't consider that very comforting. But in Palestine, a good shepherd was a stout warrior. In fact, shepherding was often a preparation for a warrior. That's why David, for example, becomes a great warrior, and he's a warrior almost immediately when he confronts Goliath. One of the reasons is because he was fighting in the desert with animals and who knows what as a shepherd. And shepherds typically carried a rod, a big thick club, and they carry a staff. Both can be used as a weapon. Typically the club is a 2-foot piece of oak that's heavy. And modern shepherds, that club is filled with nails. And so suddenly we realize that the shepherd of Psalm 23 is not just a nice guy. Certainly Jesus, the shepherd, the great shepherd, is loving and kind, yes. But he's also mighty, he's firm, he's resolute, he's a judge, and he's a punisher of those who are evil. The sheep are safe in the ravine because the shepherd will use his club to beat up or kill their attackers. The shepherd is willing to fight for you, you see? He's willing to defend you. He's willing to endure pain and danger to do what's needed. And he will cause great harm to enemies. And many of you will know that, and this is where this psalm becomes very real for Francine. For the last 10 years, Francine lived in and out of the homeless shelter system. You will know that after her divorce, she had nowhere else to go. She lived in the shelters and at other times in rooms that people would rent out. And on a few occasions, she even slept on the streets. This is an inherently dangerous life. You are not safe on the streets, nor are you safe in the shelters. And yet, Jesus protected her again and again and again, and so that she can be sitting right here in this church. Jesus used his rod to keep attacks away from her, and his staff to pull her away from potentially unsafe situations. And many would expect Francine to say that her street smarts kept her safe, but that's not what she says. She says, Jesus kept me safe. He protected me. And because she believed he would, he did. Even though she walked through the valley of the shadow of death, the gloomy place Jesus led her through. And therefore, she knows, as we all need to know, that there's no evil that can separate someone from Jesus Christ. And if you have Jesus, you've got the biggest stick on the block. And not just a stick, but someone who loves you and who knows you like the best shepherd. There's no danger capable of limiting or blocking what Christ wants to do for you. There's no evil worth fearing if Christ is with you. This is the great blessing of believing in the true shepherd. The true shepherd can do that. False shepherds cannot. That's why we say, blessed are those whom the shepherd leads. And there's more. Many would say that many would expect Francine to be glad that those years are over, the 10 years. But it's not how Francine talks about it. Verse 7, look what it says. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Most curious line. Listen, many times Francine ate at homeless shelters, food banks, places like this. Many times she had to eat in the presence of those that she knew were dangerous. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. And the table here probably should be understood as banquet. You see, in Jesus Christ, for the last 10 years, Francine never starved. In a situation in which we would expect that might happen. Many times she ate in dangerous places. Many times she wondered if she would have food, but she always did. 10 years without her own place to call a home. And yet she had food. And it was more. Because Francine knew Christ, these years weren't a loss. You see? She doesn't need our pity as if it was the worst experience ever. No. Because she knew Christ, there are many good memories and good things from the last 10 years, and there's great joys. Francine would say she didn't necessarily know a lot about Christ, but she knew Psalm 23, and that was enough. Because it was real. Christ was a rock. She was blessed by Jesus even in the midst of living in an unstable situation. And good memories, many. And good things were done. That's hence the words, right? You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. With Christ we have everything that is good, even when our earthly situation is rotten and full of danger and lack. But we have Christ, we have everything, you see? Even when surrounded by enemies. We have an overflowing cup, oil for our parched skin in a dry climate, okay? And a banquet table laid for us. Even if we lose our husband to divorce, even if our children move away, even if our mental health is a struggle and requiring treatment, even when we have no money, we live and we have no home to call home, even if we have nothing, but if you have Christ, you have everything. And many of us today would say, I don't believe that. If I lost my family, if I lost my home, if I lost my job, I wouldn't be able to survive. I couldn't do it. I couldn't live. Some of us will say that even if we lose our vacation, I don't know how I'm going to survive. But here we have proof that that's not true, is it? We think that we need to cling to the things of our lives and the people of our lives as a person clinging to a life raft. But the only life raft is the true shepherd, Jesus Christ. That's the only life raft that doesn't sink. And it's the only life raft in which you'll get to shore and flourish. And even if everything was taken away from you, if you still had Christ, you would still have an overflowing cup. It's true because we've seen it now, haven't we? And Francine will confess her hope today in this church, that Jesus is her only hope, because he is. He's had to be. And again, that's not because Francine is stronger or wiser than us. It's because Jesus is so powerful and real. You see? Francine would strenuously deny that this is all because she's such a great person. It's not true. It's because Jesus Christ was her shepherd and is her shepherd today. You see? And she's seen it. That has to be true. Otherwise, we don't even want to imagine. And that means, brothers and sisters, that as she depends on him and that means you can depend on him in the same way. He can refresh your soul if you let yourself be led by him. He can lead you to green pastures in him. He can give you an overflowing cup. It can be done. If only you would stop eating at the other banquets of possessions and toys and career. And who knows what else. You know which banquet you want to eat at. This afternoon we'll talk about idolatry. See, the other banquets, they don't refresh your soul. They don't fill your cup to overflowing. They take from you. But the banquet of Jesus, the overflowing cup of Jesus, refreshes your soul and never, ever fails and is eternal. Because the shepherd, you see, this is point 3, is not just the shepherd. The shepherd, it says in Psalm 23, is my shepherd. Mine. Greater words were never spoken. He leads you. He leads me. He knows you. He knows me. He calls to you. I call to my sheep and they know me, he says. And again, Psalm 23 is an attack on those of us who would come to church and keep Jesus at arm's length. No. He's near you. He's calling to you. He wants to know you. And he wants to love you and refresh you. He's calling to you, and he knows his sheep. No one else on this earth can offer you what this psalm is. That's why it's so popular. Jesus has a shepherd's heart, beating with a pure and generous love that said, you know what, my life is not too dear for my sheep. I will die for my sheep. He's a shepherd's eye. He looks at the whole flock. He's always watching at all times. He misses not even the poor little lamb wandering away on the side. He is a shepherd's faithfulness. The shepherd never, remember, the Palestinian shepherd never leaves his sheep. And neither does Jesus. He will never fail or forsake nor leave you comfortless. He will not flee when he sees the wolf coming. And he has a club to deal with the wolf and the Bedouin. He also has the shepherd's tenderness. You see, the shepherd delivers all the babies in the flock, the lambs. No lamb is so tiny that he won't care for it or carry it as they walk to the next chapter or the next pasture. There's no saint that he will not gently lead. There's no one of us that he won't lift up when we are down. He comforts as a mother would. And his gentleness makes him even greater than the shepherd who can only defend. And I once heard a vivid illustration of what trusting what the words "my shepherd" meant to someone. I'll read it to you. I'm not sure if it's a true story. Evidence suggests it is, but I'm not sure. But nonetheless, it goes like this. Some time ago, a gentleman taking holiday in a rural area came across a little boy minding sheep. The stranger entered into conversation with the lad and asked him if he knew the 23rd Psalm. The little shepherd said no. The gentleman said, "Let me teach you the first sentence." The gentleman said, "Say these words after me. The Lord is my shepherd." The boy repeated the words. And the gentleman said, "Now repeat each word again and count a finger as you do so in this way. So the Lord is my shepherd." No. It's supposed to be 5. Math's not my strong suit. So he told off a finger at each of the words. And he said, when you come to that word, my, right, so my is the fourth, he said, grip your fourth finger tightly with the other hand. And never forget, my lad, he said, that the Lord is not only a shepherd, but your shepherd. And so the stranger went his way, and the boy told his parents at night of the strange gentleman and his lesson. And during the following winter, the snow fell heavily in that district. One day, the boy and his sheep were missed. They were discovered in a deep drift. After the sheep had been dug out, the search party came upon the body of the boy, and his finger was held by the other hand. And I think those of you who know Christ will know the last line of Psalm 23. Right? Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Even that boy, he knew 5 words of this psalm, and he knew it. He knew what it meant. And so today, Francine, as you profess your faith, let this promise live in your heart. Today you join the church, and in Christ, you will dwell in it for the rest of your days. If you should wonder if that's possible, I encourage you to look around you. If you look closely, you'll see those who have sat in these pews in the Canadian Reformed Church for 90 years. In fact, I believe John Tennage celebrates his 90th birthday this week. If you talk to those who sat for all those years, you'll discover, as you talk to them, especially those who have been here for 90 years, you'll discover that Psalm 23 emerges from them both in language and action. You can't sit in the church like this for 90 years and believe in Jesus without a shepherd. No human is really capable of this. It's not because the people of this church are so smart or brilliant that they're here. It's because the shepherd has brought them here and keeps them here. Because Christ never abandons his people. He's not a hired hand who runs when danger comes or works for a wage. No, he's a shepherd who was willing to die for you. He died for you too, Francine. And so we can say in this church, I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And that's not a boast. That is a certainty because it's said in Jesus. And so today we've sung this song, we believe this song. And your profession of faith will be an affirmation of this psalm. Because everything else may fail in this life. But Christ's love and goodness will always follow those whom he knows for the rest of their days of their life, if indeed you would be led by him. For blessed are those whom the shepherd leads. And may you today be led by him to follow him, and he will never, ever abandon you. Amen.